So thanks for having me. This is my first time in Sweden, and it's really great to be here. This is also, I know it's probably hard to believe, but this is the first time I've ever had a beatboxing flute player open for me. So that was really great. Nice surprise. So I work in Redmond. If you're ever in Redmond at the Microsoft campus, I'll buy you lunch and show you around. It's a really wonderful place. And I've been on Visual Studio for about the last 10 years. And for the last 5 years, I've been focused on application lifecycle management, which is what I'm really excited about to talk to you about today. I'm on channel 9. I put all of my my virtual machines and my hands-on labs, my demo scripts, everything that I'm going to show you today, as a matter of fact, is available for you to download from my blog, and you can go back and dive deeper than we'll have time for today if you want to get hands-on and learn a little bit more about it. So there is a Visual Studio 2010 virtual machine with hands-on labs that shows you Team Foundation Server and some of the other ALM capabilities that are in there. And then a couple of months ago, when the beta of Visual Studio 11 shipped, I posted that online as well. So what you'll see me deliver today is actually based on the virtual machine that I've built. As Jonas mentioned, I've written a couple of books. I'm not allowed to say whether or not I'm working on the next versions of these books, so I'll just put that out there. And then let's dive right into the content. So when we think about application lifecycle management at Microsoft, we really want to think about the entire end-to-end lifecycle of your applications. So obviously Visual Studio for the last 15 or so years has been really focused on helping software developers be more productive. Writing code, checking your code quickly, using graphical designers to build great applications. And that's great. That continues to be a focus for us. But we also recognize that software is rarely built by a single developer working at their desk for 40 or 50 or 60 hours a week anymore. Now it's more about teams. And it's about people that are outside of the traditional software development team as well. And an interesting thing happens as you get more and more people involved in a process. You get more and more opportunity for communications to go wrong and for somebody to give you requirements, for example, that you as a software team think that you understand, but at the end of the day, there's kind of a mismatch there. We say this back at Microsoft all the time. How often have you built what your customers asked for, but not really what they wanted? And so we think that there's a great opportunity to solve that problem. Another problem that I'll talk about today is the problem of dealing with conflicting priorities. So a lot of us out there, actually just quick show of hands, how many people are practicing Scrum today or something similar to Scrum? Fantastic, that's great. So I'm going to show you a lot of tooling that we've built into Team Foundation Server 11 that can help you run your teams in a more Scrum or more Agile-like fashion. But for those of you that didn't raise your hands, I also want you to know that the same tooling that I'll show you today can also be used if you're practicing a waterfall methodology or any custom or third-party methodology as well. So we make it really easy for you to bring your own process to Team Foundation Server, and we'll give you the tools to make you successful. Now, I mentioned, of course, that we still, of course, want to make developers successful. One of the challenges as teams start to become more agile is if you're a developer that goes in the morning working on a particular feature, by your lunch break, you may have a different priority because the business says, we need you to fix this bug, we need you to go work on this new feature. And the challenge for you as a developer is to be able to quickly switch from one context to another. So I'll show you some tooling that we've added within Visual Studio that can help you work more productively and in a better situation on your Agile teams. And then we'll also close the loop with those stakeholders as well by going back and getting their feedback based on some incremental portion of work that you've delivered for them. We want to get feedback from the stakeholders to say, did this meet your expectations? And if not, what can we do to help you actually finish out this application so that it does make you very, very happy as an end user? Finally, our job isn't done when we just build software and hand it over to the operations team. Obviously, when we build things in a development and test environment, we're going to do our best to test the applications to make sure that they work great. But inevitably, you're going to have problems in production which need to be solved. And this is another one of those big gaps in communication because the folks that are running your applications kind of live in a different world than the folks that are building the applications. And when you get a call at 3 a.m. saying, hey, we have a problem with the website, you have to spend a lot of work today trying to figure out what that problem is, trying to collect diagnostics, trying to get more information that you can use to first understand the problem so that you can fix it. And so I'll show you some of the new tooling that we have within Visual Studio 11 and Team Foundation Server 11 to really help you bridge that gap. And we talk about DevOps as being this way of trying to bridge that gap between the two organizations. So let me jump out of PowerPoint here and jump straight into demo. I hope you don't mind. I'm going to be using demos for the rest of the presentation. And actually, it's kind of funny. I mentioned that I'm getting out of PowerPoint, but the first thing that I'll show you is actually a tool that we've built right on top of PowerPoint that allows you to create rich storyboards. So how many people are doing storyboarding today as a way to work with the business and start to build out an application before you start writing it? So I don't see a lot of hands. Storyboarding is a more and more popular approach. We use it a lot at Microsoft, whether we're building a website or Visual Studio. And one of the advantages of storyboarding is that it's very visual. You know, as human beings, we like to say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, just like a picture is worth 1,000 words, a good storyboard can be worth a 1,000-page spec. So I can get into PowerPoint now, and I can start running through builds. I can take advantage of custom animations. This is something that I could throw up on a projector like I'm doing this morning and get feedback from a room full of potential users. Or the really nice thing about being on PowerPoint is that most people in the business world already have PowerPoint. I could even send this to my mom, who is not very technically savvy, but she knows how to use PowerPoint, and she can view this presentation, give me some feedback, maybe even start manipulating some of the workflows in here. And so, like I said, we've built right on top of PowerPoint. You'll notice we have this storyboarding tab up at the top. On the right-hand side, we see a lot of different shapes that are built in here. So I have shapes for doing Windows Phone applications, Windows 8 applications, web applications. We're going to open this up to the community as well. So we expect that pretty soon we'll have iOS and Android applications. And if I look over at my slide sorter, I can just quickly create a new slide, and we could take advantage of PowerPoint's built-in layout functionality. And so as we started to build out this storyboarding solution, we found that PowerPoint actually already has a lot of the same capabilities that we need in a storyboarding solution. So it was a natural place for us to build out this functionality. So I can call this fabricam.com. I can then decide later on that I want to change the layout. And so we're taking advantage of that visual inheritance model that's built into PowerPoint. Sometimes you might even be architecting a brownfield application where you're adding new functionality to an existing application. So one of the things I might do is come into my existing application and grab a screenshot. So we make it really easy for you to do that. And then I can do something like sort for a button, and we'll call this my Fabricam button. Actually, what I meant to say is we'll call that a create new. And we'll fill that with some color. And I might spend some time getting this to be exactly the way that I want it, using my corporate UI standards, the right font size, the right kerning, the right, beveled edges. And at that point, what I might want to do is save that shape. So I can save that to my storyboard shapes, and I can call this Fabricam button. And then what I could do is I could export this shape and share it with other people on my team so that when Jonas is creating his storyboards later on, he can take advantage of those shapes and I can use his shapes. So that's PowerPoint storyboarding. It's not very technically deep, but it just really allows you to quickly get in there and build storyboards so that you can have that conversation with your customers before you start investing in expensive lines of code, which are going to be harder to change down the road. After that, the next thing I might want to do is start to represent that work on my backlog. So maybe there's a new piece of functionality I want to add here. And so this is the new Team Web Access view within Team Foundation Server 11. So let me just pause right there and tell you where we're at in the product cycle. Visual Studio 11 is the code name for the next release of Visual Studio and Team Foundation Server. So we call it Team Foundation Server 11. Eventually, we'll have a year that we apply to it, but we haven't announced branding on that yet. Everything I'm showing you is based on the beta that we released in February. And in fact, the beta is of such a high quality that we've actually licensed it with a Go Live license. And what that means is if you want to start using this for building your day-to-day applications, you can take this back and start using it tomorrow. And it's also supported as well. So if you go to Microsoft.com, if you have an issue, you can submit a request for support. And we give you free support during the beta period if you have any problems. The other nice thing about Visual Studio 11, I should mention, is that you don't have to upgrade your projects and solutions to Visual Studio 11. So if you have some people on your team that want to use Visual Studio 2010 Service Pack 1 and other people that want to use Visual Studio 11 in beta, you can do that without having to maintain two separate copies of your projects and solutions. So it makes it really easy for you to start trying these features that I'm showing you. But coming back to Team Foundation Server, this is the new web access view. You notice I have this really nice Metro style UI that's built in here, and this is all customizable. This is actually a page specifically for my Fabricam web team. So with Team Foundation Server, I could support thousands of people on a single server if I wanted to, but we don't work with thousands of people on a daily basis. We work with those 15 or 20 people on our immediate team, and so you can represent this here, and now every team has their own homepage that they can go to. Notice I have my burn down up here, and we also have an individual backlog. So I could come into the backlog and start taking new feature requests that are coming in from the business. So I can quickly say, the admin should be able to edit employees from the portal. Whatever new functionality I want to add, when I've captured that, it automatically pushed it up to Team Foundation Server. I can drag and drop work from within here, and it's just, again, updating it on the fly within Team Foundation Server. I can even turn on forecasting. So those of you that practice Scrum are familiar with the idea of velocity and being able to look at historical velocity. So you'll notice I have my historical velocity up here. And then we have story point estimates down here for my work. And so if I work in a Scrum fashion, I might want to come in here and estimate the amount of story points or the velocity I can complete during an iteration. And so based on story points or a velocity of 10, this is how much work I can achieve. If I bring on more people to the project and buy more pizza for them, that kind of thing, we might accelerate that velocity. And so you can have that conversation with your customer and say, if you want these features faster, I need more money, right? And so I'm going to do that one thing that you never do or should never do within a Scrum team, but we all do it anyway, right? I'm going to add new work to an existing in-flight iteration. And that's going to be assigned to Sprint 3. And then when I move into Sprint 3, you can see this is everything that I'm doing in this current sprint. So those of you that use Team Foundation Server today will appreciate that we've added dates to iterations. So I've actually frozen my virtual machine on February 15th so that it looks like I'm still within that particular iteration. So that's why the dates are different. But the idea is that based on the date, it's going to render all of your reports and all of your iterations as appropriate. And so what I can do is start to break this work down. So I can say design the UI. We'll ask Annie to work on that. And then, of course, we need to implement the UI. And I'll ask Cameron to work on that. And what I'm doing is I'm just taking that new feature request and I'm breaking it down into the individual tasks that I want my team to accomplish. And notice when I added new work to this iteration, not surprisingly, I've now exceeded the capacity for my team because you can see on an individual basis who's actually overwhelmed. Now, I don't want to burn out my team and ask them to work weekends, so what I'll do is I'll take this work down here and I'll just drag it to some future iteration. It updates in real time. These are all reports that are against the operational store within Team Foundation Server. So we have a lot of rich reports in Team Foundation Server that show you all sorts of different views on how your projects are progressing and how work is expanding and condensing as you move through your project. but some of those reports take a while to refresh because they're using analysis services. We know that for these particular views, you want to use them in your daily stand-up meetings. So you want to be able to quickly adjust capacities and adjust new work as it's coming in and you're discovering new impediments. And so what you'll notice here is that these are all updated in real time against the operational store. The capacity view is where I decide how much time on task individual resources are working on my particular team. And so you might have a shared resource, like Annie is a designer. So she's a shared resource that works on multiple teams. And on my particular team, she's working for 3 hours a day. So you have that flexibility. You can get in here and model team days off and vacation days, or if someone is out sick, you can do that. And you also have the ability to sort by activity as well. So on a real Scrum team, you don't assign work up front, but you might categorize it based on activity. So I have development, design, documentation. And so I might say that Annie is a designer, and then based on the types of tasks that are coming in, we then have X number of hours for design resources per day. So you have a lot of flexibility in here. Now, once I've adjusted my plan, and I'm happy now with what I want to work on, the next thing I might do is start writing some code. And while I'm writing some code, I might want to have this modern-day implementation of Post-it notes on a whiteboard. Post-it notes on a whiteboard are great. They're really easy for people to use. It's quick, easy to quickly update things. But they only work if we're all in the same room. And so as we look at teams that are becoming increasingly geographically distributed, or maybe my manager sits in another building and I want him to see all of the progress my team is making, that can be tough to share. So this is our modern day implementation of Post-it notes on a whiteboard. I also have a funny story. I was talking to a developer who works on a Scrum team, and he was at the office late one day, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. I know that's not late for developers, but bear with me here. So he was at the office late one day, and the janitor came in, and he started picking up all these Post-it notes that had fallen on the floor in front of the whiteboard. And the janitor started putting them back up on the whiteboard. And he walks over and he says, wait a second, how do you know where those Post-it notes go? And the janitor says, just anywhere there's space, right? So I feel sorry for the developers that came in the next morning and go, I know I completed that work. What happened there? And so what I can do is I can quickly, just drag work over. This is all touch enabled as well. So if you have a touch monitor in your team room, you can just drag work over. Maybe when you're on the way to lunch, maybe you just want to tap this and say, I've earned a few hours against that. Those of you that have good eyesight, you can see in the burn down up here that as I move work over, it's actually updating that burn down in real time. So now we can see all the work that's being progressed. I can also look at this on a per person view as well. So when I go to my stand-ups, I might ask each team member to say what they worked on yesterday, what they're working on today. So that's a nice way of highlighting that work. I can also switch this over to a team member view here. And if I scroll down, you'll see that Cameron has the most work on my team. And so we might want to reassign some of this work, so we can just quickly tap it and update it. So it makes it really easy for you to use. Like I mentioned, we want to allow you to bring your process and take advantage of these tools as well. So if you have your own custom states within your process that you want to represent, you can add a few lines of XML, and then it will just model that new set of states within the Agile task board. The other nice thing is that because this is a web application, I can just scale it as much as I'd like to, just zooming in and out. So that's Agile planning and tracking. Let's jump into Visual Studio now. I mentioned earlier that one of the challenges of being a software programmer on an Agile team is that you're constantly interrupted. Maybe even if you're not on an Agile team, you're probably interrupted too. Different priorities coming in, people sending you Facebook messages, whatever. And so here I'm in the middle of some work. I've made some file edits. I've set some breakpoints. Maybe I've set some debug windows exactly the way that I want them across multiple monitors. And so from within here, let's say that I get interrupted. How am I going to switch from this work into a new task and then switch back? Well, one of the things we've done is we've re-implemented the Team Explorer view from within Visual Studio. Those of you that are new to Team Foundation Server, Team Explorer is the native interface within Visual Studio for connecting to Team Foundation Server. We also have another version of this called Team Explorer Everywhere, which works in Eclipse, so you can start doing Java development and run this on Macs if you want to. And so I can click over to My Work now, and My Work is the single view that shows me all of the items that I care about as an individual developer. And so here you can see that I have a custom query, which is showing me all of my tasks, any bugs that are assigned to me. And then I also have this work that's in progress. And so when I started working on this particular feature, I can indicate that this is the work item I'm working on, drag that up to in progress from down below. And then if I get interrupted, what I can do is just say suspend and shelve. I can give a reason if I want to. You know, maybe I had to go to lunch or something like that. And then I can check in that work. It's going to back it up onto Team Foundation Server. It's then going to clean up my environment so that I can go do some other work. And then once I'm ready to work on something else, all I need to do is say resume. It's going to automatically rehydrate this work right within Visual Studio. If I had multiple monitors, those debug windows would be open up on each monitor. And it's a really nice way for you to kind of switch back and forth as you get interrupted. So let me just go ahead and clean up this environment. So I'll show you a couple of other things here. From within My Work, or from within Team Explorer, I can open up the Source Control Explorer. And let's say that I want to make some file edits in here. One of the things I'd like to do is update this regular expression. So you can see I've commented out that regular expression. I've been working on making that update. And this is kind of a complex regular expression, so I might want to have somebody else on my team take a look at this. So what I'll do is I'll just go back to My Work, and I'll request a code review. Now what I can do is give a name of other people on my team that I want to take a look at this work. And I can give a comment, does this regular expression look right? And I can submit that request. It's going to then take my changes, back them up on a Team Foundation Server so that other people on my team can access those. And then when I switch over to another user, and that other user opens up Visual Studio and goes into Team Explorer and goes into his view of My Work, he'll see that he has this code review request at the bottom. And so when he opens up this code review request, he can see that he's been asked to take a look at this. Annie has also been asked to take a look at this. So what he may do is go ahead and accept this code review. And that way, if Annie sees it, she can see that Jason is already working on it, so she doesn't have to waste her time on it. And then if I come down to the address bar, or the address file, rather, and open that up. This is a new diffing tool that's built right into Visual Studio. I think this is the first time we've changed the diffing tool in something like 20 years. So I think Jonas was 5 years old at that time. So if we take a look at this, you can see as I scroll, it's moving in synchronization. So that's really nice. I can add an overall comment here. So I can say, you know, regex looks great. I can also leave a per file comment, or I can leave a comment specifically on a block of code. So I can leave a comment here that says, you know, change this to postal code. Zip code is something we only use in the United States, but we would like to make this a more politically correct, geographically friendly code base. So that's a nice way to clean that up. The other thing that's nice about this experience in Visual Studio 11 is you'll notice at the top here, we have what's called a provisional tab. So how often have you been debugging software and you're stepping in, you're stepping over, you're stepping in, and pretty soon you have like 40 tabs open across Visual Studio. You need to go buy a widescreen monitor just to use Visual Studio. It's a real pain, right? Well, what we do now is by default, anytime we recognize that you're in the middle of this context-sensitive task, like doing a code review or doing a debugging session, we'll open up all of those windows within these provisional tabs. And the nice thing about that is when I finish this code review, it's automatically going to clean up my environment and put it back to what I was working on. Now, if I wanted to, of course, I could go ahead and promote this. So I could click on this white button, and this would then become a regular tab within Visual Studio. But in this case, I don't need to. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and submit this code review back to Cameron, and it's going to clean up my environment. So that's something that's really, really nice. So now, as Cameron, when I come back in here and I refresh this work, you'll see maybe it's hard to see, but that was bold, indicating that there was a change to that particular work item. And so now, I'm happy with this. Maybe I could create a new task to go do a bunch of refactoring, or I could just quickly change zip code, refactor that to postal code. But once I'm ready, I can go ahead and complete that, and I can check that in. And so the nice thing about this is that that code review is actually associated automatically with the change set. And what I mean by that is if later on, let's close some files here. Later on, when I come back to look at this particular file, I can perform an annotation of that file, which basically shows me the last person to modify a particular row. And it's like blame, if you're familiar with Subversion. And over here on the left, I can see that Cameron made this change. And if I open up that change set over on the right-hand side, we can see that it was linked to this particular code review. And that's really nice, especially if any of you do release management or you're responsible for looking at all the code that's being merged from one branch to another, because you can look at the changes, and before you accept a change that's going to go out in a release, you can say, has a senior developer reviewed this change? And if not, maybe I want to send this back to the developer and ask them to go through a proper code review. So by having that code review process built right into Team Foundation Server, you get the full traceability and auditability by being able to go back later on and answer those types of questions. Whereas in the past, if I wanted to do a code review, I might email it to Jonas, and we don't have any record of that within Team Foundation Server. So switching gears a little bit, another thing that I want to show you is the new unit testing support that we have within Visual Studio 11. And so the first thing we've done is we've really simplified all those test windows that you have within Visual Studio. So if you do testing with Visual Studio 2010, there's just a lot of test windows. There's the test list view, the test results view, and so on and so forth. It can be kind of overwhelming if all you're doing is working with unit tests. So what we've done is we've consolidated a lot of that functionality into a single view known as the Test Explorer. And the other thing we've done is we've opened this up so that third parties can easily create adapters that then plug into Visual Studio. And so what I've done is I've downloaded the in-unit and the X-unit adapters, which are already available for the Visual Studio 11 beta. And you can plug those right into Visual Studio 11. And then when I build my project, Visual Studio looks across the entire solution for any unit test that it knows how to build. And so, for example, you can see here that this is the traditional unit test called the Visual Studio unit test, or sometimes called MS Test unit test. But if I look down here, this is an X-unit test. And from a Visual Studio perspective, I don't care what tests those are. I can just run them all at the same time, which is really, really nice. I can also take those test adapters and put them on my build server as well. And so those are free adapters. You don't have to pay anything for them. They come straight from the same guys that build the unit testing frameworks themselves. So here you can see I ran my test. I had a test fail. So if we take a look at this particular test result, it's all kind of condensed into one view. I can quickly jump to the line of code that failed or the line in my test that failed. So that's really, really nice. And I've already seen some people starting to write test adapters for doing things like JavaScript unit testing as well. So they're actually very easy to build. You can build them yourselves if you have your own maybe in-house testing framework that you use. The other thing I want to show you here is a technology from Microsoft Research called code clone analysis. And I'm sure none of you have done this, but I have been known to occasionally look at code that somebody else wrote, copy it, paste it, make a few changes, boom, it's mine, right? I'm sure none of you do that. But let's pretend that somebody else who's not at the conference that's on your team does that as well. That can create some challenges for you when it comes to code maintainability. You know, you kind of want to take advantage of the pattern that says that you should maximize reuse of code. And so if I run code clone analysis, it's actually going to look semantically across my entire project for any blocks of code which look similar. Now, what do I mean by semantically? That means they don't have to be syntactically identical. I can use different variable names. I can use even different objects that may be derived from some common object. And the Microsoft research technology that we have in here is really good at looking across that solution for anything that looks like it might be similar. And so here is just a really basic example where somebody took some code and maybe they changed the very last line here. They changed the redirect action. So that's a nice example of where I might decide, I want to actually refactor this into some common method that takes the redirection as a method argument. The other thing you can do with this, if I just find some code here, I have this employees controller class here. And you'll notice here that I have a block of code where I'm running an insert or update and then a save. Now, maybe this is my first time that I've ever worked with this particular object. It comes from another library that somebody else on my team maintains. One of the questions I might have is when I'm performing an insert or update and then I save, is it a best practice to wrap that in a try-catch block? And so one of the things you can do now is you can just select that line of code or those two lines of code, and you can say find matching clones based on that selection. And what this does now is it looks across my entire solution for anything that looks similar based on that selection. So here you can see I have an employee repository where I'm doing the same thing. I have a customer repository. So again, those are different objects, but they derived from the common base parent object. And so it makes it really easy for us to then go back and find things that might be interesting for you. So those are three ways you can use it. One is bug fixes, one is code maintainability and kind of refactoring your overall code. And then the third, of course, is being able to learn or look for best practices and patterns from other people, the way that they're using objects in your solution. Another thing I'll show you is I get asked all the time whether or not we're going to make it easier for you to work offline with Team Foundation Server. That's a real pain today, I'll be honest. And we finally really fixed that experience. The other thing a lot of people ask is for the ability to easily use a third-party editor. Like let's say that I had a bitmap file that was part of my solution, and I want to drop over to Photoshop or Expression or Paint. The developers, Photoshop, right? Paint. And so from there, I want to quickly make a change to some files. The problem with that is when I save that, Visual Studio, or rather Team Foundation Server, is going to complain because those files are marked read-only when they're under source control with TFS 2010. And so what we've done now is implemented a new feature called local workspaces, which fixes all of that. Notice that I can come right into my source tree, and I'll just browse down here to a directory. And we'll go into Windows Explorer. And so this is a directory that's under source control. What I'll do is I'll just quickly make a change to this file. Maybe notice I did not get a read-only complaint there. Maybe I'll just create a new text document here, TechDays, and save it. Whatever changes I want to make, I can now switch back over to Visual Studio, and I can look at my pending changes and notice that it automatically picked up that README text file that was changed. So if I went on an airplane and then came back, as soon as I hooked up to Team Foundation Server, it would do that comparison, and it would see that this file has changed. I also created that new file, which by default we don't include in your pending changes because we don't want to have you accidentally copy a big file into a folder and then have that version controlled. But all I need to do is click on Promote, and then that becomes part of my change set. Same thing with file deletions. If you accidentally delete a file, they'll show up in detected changes, but you can go back later on and promote those if it was in fact your intention to delete that folder. We can check that in. The other scenario that this is really helpful with is anybody doing any iOS development? No? I can't really see everybody. All right, a couple brave souls raising their hands back there. That's okay. No problem. We all love you. And so one of the things that a lot of people ask for is the ability to track all their projects under Team Foundation Server so that their Xcode developers don't have to use some other solution for measuring or for monitoring their projects. And so the challenge is that Xcode only supports Subversion and Git. And there's not really an extensibility within Xcode for us to add Team Foundation Server functionality. But if I was running a Mac and I was using Xcode, what I could do is use Team Explorer Everywhere within Eclipse to put my projects under source control. And then I minimize Eclipse. I go back into my Xcode development environment. I make my really cool iPhone application or whatever. Then when I save that and come back to Team Explorer Everywhere, it will pick up all those detected changes, and I can just check them in. So now, Team Foundation Server truly, if you want to use it for measuring, monitoring all of your projects, you can do that. So it's a really nice solution for that. Now, I mentioned earlier that one of the challenges with building software in kind of an agile environment is we want to be able to quickly respond to customer feedback. And so we did some design work up front where we built this storyboard, and then we went off and built what we think the customer was asking for at that point. But anytime you do that, you're going to show it to the customer, and they're going to say, hey, I need you to change the color of that button, or change the way that those pages work, or it may inspire some new idea once they see your software working in action. And if you think about how you gather feedback today, when I'm here in Sweden, I can sit down with Jonas and I can say, hey, Jonas, can you take a look at this application and tell me whether or not it meets your expectations? And we can have a nice conversation, and I can watch him use the software. And that's great when we both have time at the same time and we're both in the same country. But when I go back to Redmond this weekend, we're going to be separated by 9 hours, and it's much harder for us to do that. The other challenge, of course, is let's say that I want to get feedback from everybody in this room. I can maybe send an email to all of you and say, hey, take a look at this new software that I've built. And some of you might email me back, and some of you might see me in the hallway, and some of you might, I don't know, write on my Facebook wall or whatever. And then we'll start to have those conversations. But the challenge is that puts a lot of work on me to try to capture that feedback in a way that can then become actionable for my team to make changes. And so what we've done now with Team Foundation Server 11 is we've actually built feedback right into the tool. And so what I can do is request feedback straight from my team dashboard. Jason Zander is the vice president of the Visual Studio division. So I'll ask him for some feedback. I'll give him the name of the website or the name of the client application that he needs to go install. If there's any additional steps for how he installs that application, I can provide those to him here. So log in as test user 1. And then down here at the bottom is where I give him the list of things that I want his feedback on. And so if you do acceptance testing with your users today, this might be the list of acceptance tests that you want him to give feedback on. It could also be a way for you to send this over to your legal team and say, is this going to meet all of the, the privacy guidelines that the EU sets out for us, or whatever questions you want to ask. So I can say, does the employee page provide the right level of functionality? And if there's any other instructions here, I can say, click on the employee page, and here's exactly what I'm asking for. And at the end, this is going to generate an email that you can then send to Jason, or you can send to 100 users at the same time if you wanted to. And then when he opens up that email, it's going to ask him for his feedback. You'll notice a link down here that says install the feedback tool. So we have a new feedback tool that he can use, which is kind of the next best thing to actually being in the room with Jonas as he's giving feedback. Let me go ahead and launch that feedback session. I already have the feedback tool installed, which, by the way, this is a free tool. Your users that are sending you feedback don't even need a client access license to Team Foundation Server. So you could send this to 1,000 users if you want to, as long as they have access to your TFS server, and you can set up a special permissions group for them if you want to. Then they can give you feedback. So here it's telling him to open up the Fabricam page. once that's ready, he can then shift over to this mode, which then asks him to provide feedback on this particular acceptance test or this particular area of the application. And notice down here that I can turn on screen recordings. So as he is using the application, we can get a video back to the development team. We can get an audio annotation. Let me tell you, there's no better way to fix a bug from your vice president than to have him yelling at your software as it's not really meeting his expectations. I can also come in here and leave textual comments. So I can say, you know, I love the new logo. And then I'm going to click on the employees page. And, you know, maybe I like this, but I'd really like to, you know, maybe add an employee ID column. So I'll come in here and grab a rectangle. We'll make that purple, which is a Visual Studio color. We'll save that. And then in the purple box, please add employee ID column. Whatever feedback I want to give, I can quickly get in there. I can review that feedback and make changes to it later on. And then once I submit this, it automatically sends it to Team Foundation server. So Jason didn't have to write an email. I didn't have to read an email and then figure out a way to copy and paste that into TFS. And then when I refresh this page, this now changed to 6 feedback requests. And when I scroll down, you'll notice that this is now stored right in Team Foundation server. Again, the great thing about this is that this is all within the same system. So these are work items that are being generated when you generate a feedback request or a feedback response. And so then I can take that feedback response and I can then use that to link it to a new user story or link it to a bug fix so that when I assign that back to my development team can see all of the context that they need to understand exactly what the customer was asking for. So again, anytime we have that kind of exchange between different groups, you have the risk for a communication problem, but this can help you kind of go closer to the customer to understand exactly what they're asking for. The other nice thing about this, by the way, is that later, 6 months from now, when Jason says, why did you add an employee ID column? I can go back and show him. This is why we did it, because you asked for it. You can also start to run all sorts of interesting reports. So maybe you have an agreement with a business you're building software for that before you push new changes into production, you'll get, say, 5 stakeholders to sign off on it and give their feedback and approve it. And so this allows you to then go back and run reports later on that says, show me any new change requests that have not been signed off by the business with, say, greater than 5 feedback responses. Okay? Now, I mentioned that our job's not done just when we build the software and hand it over to the operations team. This is an application that maybe is running in a production environment, and you know, I have a bunch of customers that are using this application. Most of the time it works, but occasionally we get this intermittent issue. So there's an issue. And intermittent issues, of course, are very hard to troubleshoot, and we did a good job as a development team by wrapping this with a custom exception handler so we don't have that ASP.NET yellow screen of death. But the downside of that is that as an operations team, I don't have anything to go on. I don't really know exactly what's happening on this particular server. Now, how many people are familiar with IntelliTrace from Visual Studio 2010? Great, sounds good. So if you haven't seen IntelliTrace, IntelliTrace is a new historical debugging capability that we built within Visual Studio 2010. It allows you to, either from within an F5 session or maybe when you're running some tests, capture a historical record of what was happening within your .NET applications so that later on you can go back in time, just like with a VCR, you can kind of rewind and see exactly what was happening within your code. Jonas, you're too young to know what a VCR is. I'll tell you later. And the nice thing about that is along the way, we can actually capture all sorts of interesting events. So we can say, you know, this is any time an exception was thrown or caught. This is any time we wrote to a file or accessed the registry or accessed a database. And while you're doing that, we can actually capture rich information about what method variables are passed across certain boundaries or what select statement you used. And so let me show you what that looks like. What we've done is we've now taken IntelliTrace And we are allowing you to use it without Visual Studio installed just by taking the IntelliTrace collection files, and you can either have them downloaded to another computer, you can redistribute them with your applications if you want to, and we also give you a set of PowerShell commandlets that you can use as well. And so I actually did this in advance just to save time, but what I did is I first imported a set of PowerShell commands. And so you can see here's a list of commands I can run. And then what I did is I said, start collecting IntelliTrace off of this ASP.NET application pool. What that does is it restarts the application pool, and it rejits the .NET application, but it goes back and it writes certain spots along the way that we might want to capture interesting trace data. And that can be analyzed later on. And so once I've captured that trace data, I can either checkpoint it and keep collecting, or I can stop collection and then get a file that I can use in Visual Studio Ultimate to see what's happening. Now, the first question I always get when I show this is, can you use this kind of 24/7? It's not something that we currently recommend for running 24/7 in a production environment. We have some analytics that I'll talk about in a minute that can be used 24/7, but because of all the amount of data that we capture off of this experience, think of this like the computer that you plug into your car when you take it into the mechanic, and they tell you that you have a spark plug that's having a problem. So it's something that you use when you need to troubleshoot an issue or understand at a deeper level what's going on within your application. So now I've captured that log file. I can open that up from the temporary location. Again, if this was in a production data center, I could take that, copy it onto a USB key, move it over to my development environment. And now it's going to open up Visual Studio and show me all of my threads that were running in there. Here I can see a list of all of my exceptions. I could double click on one of those exceptions, and it's going to launch what looks like a debugging session. But remember, I'm not running the application on this machine. It's just a historical debugging session that allows me to see what did happen on that production environment. And so here it even took me straight to the line of code that was running. So if you want to use this, make sure you enable caching of symbols and sources on your Team Foundation server for any builds that you send into the production environment. And that's really nice so that when you do get those logs back, you might be on version 2, but you might be building version 2, but you might get logs back from version 1 of your application. And this way you can actually attach to the correct source and see exactly what's going on. And so here you can see this is the line of code that ran. You'll notice here that that this particular value was set to null. I can see all the different values within this method, and that's really, really nice. I'm not going to actually fix this bug, but you can see how you could easily do that just by kind of going back in time. Over on the right-hand side here, you'll notice that this is a list of all my exceptions. Any IntelliTrace events that IntelliTrace maybe thought were interesting would be captured here. Notice here this is an ADO.NET call. So when I look at this particular ADO.NET call, it tells me that exact SQL statement. So maybe the reason that that particular value was assigned to null was I had an error in my SQL statement, and then it wasn't actually returning the values that I expected. So it's really, really nice. The other thing that this is useful for is being able to look for issues that you didn't even know you had. So one of the great things about modern application frameworks like ASP.NET and WPF is there's a lot of logic that's built into the frameworks that automatically catches exceptions for you so that we don't bring down the application and cause a bad user experience. And while that may not actually surface any functionality that's broken to the user, you may actually have some processes that you care about that are running behind the scenes that you really need to understand. And so what I suggest, actually I've been meeting with a lot of banking customers this last week, and they're excited about the possibility of running this on production applications to see if they have exceptions that are being thrown that they didn't even know about. Because let's say that later on they need to go back and audit all of the transactions for a particular checking account. Well, maybe the checking account's working just fine for their customers, but later on they discover that some of the transactions were not being logged into a database because they didn't have, I don't know, maybe they had some threshold violation or something like that. So I always recommend using IntelliTrace just to hook up to a production environment when you get a chance and take a look and see what's happening within your application that you maybe didn't even know about. The other thing I'll mention is that IntelliTrace is now free to collect. You can redistribute this application or the set of IntelliTrace binaries for free. You can even build it into your application. So if you were building like a rich client application that was a WPF application, and you get a call from your customers saying we're having a problem with this application, maybe what you can do is instrument it so that you say go to help, diagnostics, collect IntelliTrace, and then it resets the application. They can reproduce the issue, and then you can have another button that says click on help, send diagnostics file back to your company, and it automatically FTPs it or something like that. So I've seen lots of interesting ways that people are starting to use this. So we're just about finished. Let me just go ahead and wrap up on a couple of points. I mentioned all the different ways that you can work up front to really define your application and make sure that you balance the varying needs of your stakeholders, make sure that you understand their requirements before you start writing code. I mentioned some of the ways that we're helping developers within Visual Studio to do things like code reviews and suspend and resume their code. I have another session tomorrow afternoon. I can't remember the time. I think it's 3:30. But I have another session tomorrow where I will be showing some of the new testing improvements that we have for doing manual testing, doing exploratory testing. You might hear of it as agile testing. So we've got a lot of really nice stuff built into the tool there. In fact, I often talk to a lot of developers that don't even know that as part of the Visual Studio family, we now have a manual testing tool that you can use on your manual testing tools or manual testing teams. One of the really nice things about that, I know that we probably don't have many manual testers in here, but one of the nice things about that is while your manual testers are using those tools, it can run in the background and capture rich data about their test runs. So when you get a bug back from them, it can have a video recording, an IntelliTrace file, event logs off of all the machines that they were using within that particular environment. And so it just makes it really nice to, again, improve that communication boundary between development and test. I showed you how you can use IntelliTrace in production to kind of get better information about your applications that can help you quickly diagnose issues that are running in production. There's a couple of other ways that I don't have time to show you today that we're helping with that. The first is System Center 2012 actually has native integration now that you can configure it to talk to Team Foundation Server. And so the idea is that as somebody using System Center that sees an issue that's happening on a particular machine in a production environment, they can then right-click on that issue and say assign to engineering, and it's automatically going to generate an issue within Team Foundation Server that the application team can see. The other nice thing about that is that System Center now has monitoring built in that is a 24/7 monitoring solution. And when you assign that to engineering, we can automatically attach what the monitoring system knows about it. So that could be an event log, it could be how much RAM you have, it could even be a stack trace. And that is a 24/7 monitoring solution, so you don't have to worry about turning that on and off. You can keep that running on your production environment, and there's just a very small overhead there. Finally, the last thing that we've done for development and operations is we've partnered with a company called Preemptive that makes a really nice analytics solution. And so if you've ever clicked send report within a Microsoft application that crashes, I know it never happens, right? But pretend that if it ever crashed, you could say send report, and that sends a bunch of really rich, detailed information about that crash back to Microsoft that we can use to make the software better. If you've ever used Office or Visual Studio and you've opted in to when it asks you to participate in the customer improvement experience. I can't remember what they call it, but the idea is that you can send anonymous information back to Microsoft about how you use the software, so that when the Excel team later on is trying to figure out which functions people use most, they can start to balance where they want to make their investments for the next version of Excel. Well, those are all rich analytics capabilities that Microsoft has been taking advantage of for many, many years, but that's a very expensive server and analytics solution for us to maintain. Preemptive analytics has a solution now that makes it very inexpensive for you to do that. And so now what you can do is you can point at your applications, you can say instrument this for analytics, and then if your end users opt into providing that data, you can get the same type of information back. And so with TFS 11, you actually get a free version of preemptive analytics that you can use, and that captures unhandled exceptions. So think of that like your Watson data that you send to Microsoft today, and you can get that data and you can analyze it, and you can say, gosh, you know, every month at the end of the month, all of my customers in Norway are generating exceptions when they're running their payroll, something like that. And then they have another version you can pay a little bit more for, which gives you that feature by feature view. So you can go back later on and you can say, you know, which features that we invested in are actually being used the most, or you can even make some correlations to say that whenever users in Canada use this feature, it actually throws an exception. So the one last thing I'll mention is that Team Foundation Server is now available as a hosted service within the Windows Azure platform. So what that means is we took Team Foundation Server and we re-implemented a lot of the same functionality that you know and love. So source control, work items, builds are now available within the Team Foundation service is what we're calling it. It's currently in a preview mode right now, meaning that we haven't started charging for it or anything like that. It'll be a while before we start charging for it, but in the meantime, if you want to start using this for free, you can actually go to tfspreview.com and you can set up an account in a matter of minutes. Currently, you'll have to sign up for a waiting list, and then we send you a code back within a week or two that allows you to sign up, and then sometime later on, we expect that we'll open it up for kind of general sign up. So by the time you get around to looking at this, you maybe can just go to tfspreview.com and sign up right away. Okay? So I hope this was interesting. Thanks again for having me. I hope some of you will come back for my software testing talk tomorrow afternoon. I do want to be respectful of time, so I'm not going to take any questions right now, but I'll stick around if anybody has any questions or anything like that. So thank you very much for having me.